It's 1 o'clock or 1 past 1, and we'll go ahead and get started. Due to the length of our agenda today, I'll ask everyone to try to keep us on target, and I know that the council rules are in place to keep us on target a lot of times and limit us to 5-minute comments on each topic. So if we could try to stay on task if we're going to get through our complete agenda, that would be helpful. First up, as we do every budget and finance meeting, we have the director the Commissioner, Acting Commissioner of Finance, Bill O'Mara, here to give us our revenue updates. So without further ado, I'll let Mr. O'Mara take over. And these are fresh off the press, I understand it.
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. And I don't know if you want to... Anyway, can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess I will start, since this is the year-end close season. I had this page of disclaimers last month, so I just kept it in there for this month. We are in the process of closing the books. A lot of things go on, and so the numbers I'm giving you are preliminary because of being in the middle of that process. Your first request was an update on June numbers, and this is what we have. It's slightly changed from the numbers that I passed out a month, but the basic position that we're in has not changed. The employee withholdings is just almost flat. It's slightly up. And the one thing that I would point out, and I will comment on this later too, is a significant event happened in FY08, the number we're comparing to. First time in 13 years that we actually had some employers that actually paid 27 payrolls in a fiscal year instead of 26. Not all employers, but such as the Urban County Government was one of those employers where they pay every 2 weeks and as the cycle goes. So we wound up having 27 weeks of payroll from some people in our 08 numbers that we were running against for FY09. So while we were analyzing those numbers, we kept keeping that in mind. On the net profit side, we're down 2.7%, and insurance was slightly down, with franchise fees continuing the trend of being very healthy. So now I wanted to give you, this didn't come out as good as I hoped, but the trend is still there. You can see, let's see, is this the little red button? No? Okay. The yellow is the state of Kentucky, which is, and we're tracking unemployment rate here. The light blue line is the United States as a whole. The pinkish number is the Lexington MSA. And then the lowest number, that's the good news, is Fayette County. So in comparison, we have the lowest unemployment rate of these comparisons. That's the good news. The bad news is that we're following the trend, as in that it's going up. You can also see that because of all these dips and ducks, there is some seasonality to it. So plotting this number, I was afraid of this. Can you see the light blue line at the top, which is the most significant one? That is Lexington's unemployment rate. The other for the current year. And the other lines are plotting comparisons to 08, 07, and 06. And so you can see that we did follow the seasonality of a dip in unemployment in April, and we also are following the seasonality of the increase in June. What is the outstanding question is whether we will see the same trend of a lowering in unemployment rates in the fall, which has been the trend in the last 3 years, and whether we see that this year is an open-ended question. The other thing I wanted to show was permits issued, and we've had volatility in that. Again, the light blue line is the current year. We started out the year issuing more permits than the same period last year. Then we dropped below, and now here July, we're slightly above last year's levels. So there is volatility in the permits being issued right now as trying to be a predictor for building. So we have a lot of up and down to try to read into our numbers. So the July preliminary numbers, first blush, wow, that's great. Further blush, not as good as the first impression. We collected 8.8 million this July compared to 7.2 last July, a 23% increase. In looking at that, however, we discovered that there is some major payments that were paid to us in July of this year that came in the first week of August last year. So I talked about slow pay affecting us, and this is kind of the opposite of that. For comparative purposes, the July '08 does not have 1.6 million that we have already put in the bank. So that's a timing difference that's going to come back to haunt us in August. The same thing is true for franchise fees. We have $295,000 that have been received in July that last year was not received until after July of last year. So even though we have a 23% increase in withholdings and 171% increase in franchise, if you smooth those for those timing differences, our to July would be down 0.9%. In withholdings, our franchise fees would be down 23%, and the total for the four categories, instead of being up 16.2, would be down 0.9. And hence the difficulty of projections when you're doing these month-to-month comparisons. Some of the presentation, just to show you how this is a stack chart which shows that we were basically flat in payroll withholdings last year compared to the year before. Because of this robust July, we're starting off good. The next one is the same information showing 3 years so that you see the seasonality. And what I would like to point out to you are a couple of things. If you look at the very first point in July, we have basically started off at about the same place July the last 3 years. So July is not a predictor on how the whole year is going to come out. Then if you will look at the pinkish line, you'll see that we were up over the prior year some months, below some months, and we started going up and down. And this is where Councilmember Lane asked us to do an analysis comparing the first 6 months of FY09 independent of the second 6 months. And so I will roll into that analysis. The first 6 months of FY09, we started off in a negative position, but we expected that because of that extra pay period that was in July of one year versus the other. The next two volatile, the October, November, those are also the differences of when 3 pay periods were in 1 month versus the same period last year. So they kind of canceled each other out. So we had August, September, and December to try to draw conclusions from. If you sum those 6 months together, that shows a trend of being up 2%, which was a pretty good place to be last December. If you go to the second 6 months, January through June compared to the same January through June the prior year, the total trend was down 1.3. I've added July on there, which actually puts us in a plus position. Again, if you try to normalize it, that's my term. I don't know if I'm using it properly in economic terms, but taking that 1.6 out, it would show the 7-month average of down 1.1 instead of 1.3. So you have the first 6 months trending up 2%, the last 6 months trending down 1+%. So what does that mean in dollars? The FY 2010 budget for withholdings is $156.5 million. We ended last year at $148.9. If we had the whole year at a 2% downtrend, we would be short of budget $10.5 million. And I have shown the impact of the actual projected under that scenario from 2% down to 5% up, basically, in order to make budget. That's kind of a sensitivity analysis to show what kind of volatility we're looking at in the withholdings for FY 2010. I've done the same thing for net profit, if you want to go through the exercise. I'll take that as yes. Here's the bar chart, which showed that we actually collected less last year in total net profits than the year before. Here is the same information showing you the seasonality of it. It's again showing that we started off July virtually the same the past 3 years. That's not a major month, so it's not a good predictor. It's more apparent if you see this pink line that it trended above the year before, the first half, and started trending below the second half, and the gross numbers show that. At the end of December last year, the July through December, compared to the same 6 months a year before, was up 25.8%. And I remember saying that we can't explain it, we're surprised, we don't think it can last. What we didn't predict was how quickly it would change. And so the last 6 months, January through June, showed a year-over-year total 6-month comparison down 14% from the prior year. If you add July to it, the 7-month running rate would be a negative 13.5.
I'm sorry, Bill.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question? You know, you say really important things sometimes, and your voice is so calm that sometimes I don't hear it. And I think you said something really important just now. So could you repeat that part about the net profit receipts from January through July? You're off? Yeah.
Yes. Let me go back to the slide before that. I was comparing the first 6 months of fiscal '09 to the second 6 months of fiscal '09 for net profits. And so in the period July through December 2008 compared to the same 6 months the year before, we had taken in 25.8% more in net profits than the same period, that 6-month period the year before. If you look at the trend January of '09 through June of '09, this past 6 months, compare it to the same 6-month period in the year before, our net profit revenues were 14% less than the same period last year. If you add in the 7th month, our most recent data, July, the 7-month trend to the same 7 months prior year is 13.6 down. Is that
Okay, yeah, that's good.
Okay.
So do you have any historical trends, or does your gut tell you anything about how the net profits receipts relate to the the payroll withholdings?
Yes, and it's buried in this information with the spreadsheet that goes with it. I've passed that out to you all before, and I can do it again. It's a real geeky long list of every month for 13 years or whatever. But if you will look, in the 2001 period, it's the fourth bar over from the left, we had an increasing trend in net profits. Then we had 2 down years, and then an acceleration of net profits. Now, hold that in mind. This was 2001 had strong, and then '02 and '03 had erosion.
Does your laser? No,
It
you
does
don't
not
have
work.
laser, do you?
I
Okay.
just tried it. Okay, he's telling me I'm there, but I don't see it. Yes, I just technologically challenged. So what I'm showing is that this year was trending up, and then we had 2 down years, and then we started trending up again. And I was going to show you the same period for payroll, and it is not the same trend.
Okay.
Here we had a flattening between 2000 and 2001. Then we started trending up. In net profits, we still had strong net profits, had 2 down years, and trended up.
Is net profits in there? No, it's
This is
just
only payroll. So I'm showing you that
Relationship.
they move differently.
Right, so there's nothing, there's no predictive, nothing predictive in the declining net profits as that would relate to payroll.
The assumption that the interpretation I have drawn from this data is this recession, net profits reacted quicker than the last recession.
Okay.
I don't know that I'm right,
So we
but
don't,
that's,
yeah, well, I guess my hypothesis, the reason I'm inquiring about that is, and I think you mentioned this or somewhere, heard it, read it, something in the course of this last 10 or 12 months, that behavior among companies during recessionary times, private companies especially, behavior is, the inclination is toward retaining your employee base, even during adverse times. And so the likelihood of retain our ability, our payroll receipts to remain constant, even while net profits are going down, there's some reasoning in that behavioral sort of
yes, sir. And
context.
historically, we see the volatility in payroll not to be as drastic as the volatility in
Right.
the net profits, which would support your hypothesis.
But if this one is going down more during this period, during this recession, we are going down in our decline in net profits is at a faster pace than it was before, right?
That would be my,
That's your takeaway, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so
now is
Yeah,
it
and I'm-
companies are
Right.
quicker on their feet and react quicker? Is it the total base is totally different so that the economics are different? I'm not educated in the science of economics to comment.
well, just the gut sense that I get from just talking to people, which is what a lot of our, we as council members do, and communicating with business people, is that it's consistent with what you had described earlier in terms of employers are more inclined to retain their employees even during adverse times, even when they're losing money. It's the last thing you do. And so the question is, if you see that net profits going down, then it could be a predictor or an indicator that there's a threshold at which employment levels may also decline, that more layoffs would occur, and that then the payroll numbers, our payroll receipts could also decline.
Yes, and this gets into the prognosticating.
Yep.
Are we at the bottom of the trough? Have we not gotten there yet? Is it going to be a long trough, which is a U recession? Is it going to be quick in our community like a V? Is there going to be an echo effect to make a W? Those are the things that economists talk about.
Councilmember Lane, you had a question?
Yeah, would you say that the payroll tax is more of a leading indicator because it's monthly and gives you an indication of the trend, whereas the net profits tax is more of a lagging indicator because it's looking at a whole year and would compute the annual profit with the final amount of taxes based on that?
Absolutely. With the one caveat, we had instituted a estimated net profit process years back in hopes that it would help in times like these to be a predictor for net profits, but it doesn't seem to have worked. So the estimated net profits didn't take a sudden slump, and yet they just filed their net profit and asked for a refund for the year. So,
Well, the other thought I was having is that although the economy was starting to turn down last calendar year, it didn't really do the major turn down until maybe the last quarter and the first quarter of this year.
less time to react.
So that's not good because probably people could have made more profit last calendar year because the economy turned down the latter part of the year. But if it continues at a downward or status quo for the balance this year, that could have a more significant impact on our income stream and employment. Okay. That's all I got, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. You want to finish your presentation, Mr. Mayor? I think we got a couple more slides.
Yes, sir. So let's see, where were we? The first 6 months, 26 up. The last 6 months, 13 down. If you want to do a variance analysis on what kind of swing impact that would be, if we continued at a 13 or 15% below last year, it's a $5 million hit to this year's budget. We would have to show a little over a 3% increase in net profits in order to make the 31.5 budget. Insurance, the takeaway I would give here is instead of, we used to have volatility in insurance going up and down, and then we started having year after year increases. We now have 3 years of flat insurance. Now, I'm told part of that is because we didn't have any major risk events in the state. That's no longer true. So rates may go up, which unfortunately benefits our revenue. However, and cash for clunkers will help us too, because if you're paying insurance on an old car, you're paying less than if you traded in a new one. So some of the trends may help us in insurance premium, but we've had 3 years of basically flat. And the last is franchise fees. Were the one bright spot last year. We exceeded our expectations there. A caveat to that this year, it's been a cool summer, which means high electric demand is down. It has been a dry summer, a wet summer, which means watering lawns demand has been down. So we really have no control over the seasonality impact on the franchise fee revenues.
Thank you, sir. Committee members, do anybody have any questions for Mr. O'Mara in regards to the revenue numbers? Councilmember Ellinger.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my concern is where are we headed here? Because we put in this budget a 4.2% increase in revenues to balance this budget. Is that not true?
I believe the final number was, well, I'll have to go back and look. I have it here to reference.
But looking at our percentages, you're saying we're coming in, if July was an anomaly, and then you look at August, that actually wasn't going to be up, but it was going to be down. So our numbers are coming in less than what we predicted. And looking at overall, what was it last year? Less than 1% growth? So are we at this point looking at different mechanisms or different situations that we're going to be looking at? Because it's getting September here soon, and what's our plan?
Our plan is to watch it very closely. There already is tight budgets. We rolled back the operating 10%. We froze a bunch of positions and did not budget them. We're going to have to strategically hire the openings, which means there will be disagreement as to what position should be hired first versus second. The commissioners are prioritizing that now, so we can, what I'm calling strategically hire openings. And we want to see more than 1 month and see if we are if there's any good news or if it's continued to be bad news before we implement any major.
So we're in a wait and see mode at this point?
We are. And I relate it to this, Councilman Ellinger. The storm winds are blowing. So when is it that you stand your ground and get through the storm, or it's time to take cover? And that decision period is where we are right now.
By looking at the last year and so far, do you think we'll hit our revenue projections if you had to make
I think we're challenged. I don't think I would say that, sure, we'll make revenue. It's the range that is the unpredictable amount right now.
And when do you think that we finally have to make a decision, we're going to have to do something?
Well, as late as possible is one evasive answer. But are we going to see something in October, Christmas, or March? That's kind of the question. And you know, the cash for clunkers is a interesting thing to analyze, because I believe that showed that there is pent-up demand there, and that lending capacity has come back, and that people will spend money if the incentive and the price is right. So the question is, when is the public going to start spending again? And that's what we're trying to.
But on the converse of that, and that has been a successful program, but they also said now you might see the fall and the winter doldrums because they went out, they bought the cars, but now there's really not going to be any incentive to do that. So people are just going to.
There's lots of, housing starts were up in July here. I just read that they were down nationally. So all of this is a regional type of rebound. It's going to rebound quicker or slower in different pockets through the year. We can't make an assumption and read the national trend to apply it to our regionalization. So we're trying to look at our local numbers, our local employment, unemployment, housing starts, foreclosures, building permits, new business. I guess it's a potpourri of indicators that we're trying to see what kind of predictions we can get. And frustrating to me, they've been like this. There's no line that says, oh, well, that'll project out easily into the future. So it's a very challenging time to answer your question, when do we pull the trigger to some major readjustments?
But I guess, do we have something in the works? We say, well, if it comes in at this point, you said we look at Christmas, we'll look at March, we'll look at, are we kind of coming up with some scenarios? I know I saw where you said if it's at a -5%, this is what we're going to have to come up with. If it's a +5, this is what it will be. But all those, it was the top one. We weren't, even at that, we weren't hitting our number. It didn't look like, I don't believe any of those.
We would have to show, I think, I don't remember, but it was +3 to 5% in the categories in order to make budget.
Right.
That sounds like a heck of a turnaround.
I guess that's my bottom line, and that's my point. That seems like a big assumption to hit those numbers at this point.
We are challenged. We are going to have to manage day by day, just like we did last year, and to come in with a balanced budget. We ask division directors to look at 15% cuts across the board back in January. We have that list. We can go back and visit that if we need to. We may try to approach it a different way.
I guess from that, do you have anything for us if we have to make those cuts in the near future, what they would be and what your advice would be on that?
I do not have that now.
Is that something you're going to be looking at in the near future?
Well, we're looking at it almost weekly, actually.
Right.
But analyze it very deeply at the close of each month. And
because if we have to come to that, I don't want to be just given one day and here, this is what we're going to do. I'd like to be a little informed ahead of time so we can make some decisions.
I understand.
Thank you.
Councilmember Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Want to comment, which I heard yesterday, which is a big surprise for all the the clunker folks, and that is that that's going to be considered to be, I understand, taxable income.
Really?
Yeah. Surprise, surprise. And in the case of
you got me there.
Chrysler Corporation, they're matching, so that's $9,000. And people are very happy driving around there with their cars, not knowing that the hammer's going to hit. What about the expense side of the ledger as far as July was concerned?
I do not have expenses. We took time out of June close in order to get revenues, and so they are working on the expense side now. I don't have that to present to you.
Will we get that information sometime in the interim before the next Budget and Finance meeting? Or
I can confer with Director of Accounting Mary Pfister, and we can see when that information will be available.
Okay, because I mean, that's really where the rubber meets the road is to take both of those, the revenues and the expenses, and to find out about where we are on the budget. Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've heard there's a list of 180 people that we're in the process of trying to hire, and I don't know if you know whether that's accurate or not. I know the council had 5 positions that it wanted filled. I guess the question would be, has HR been given any guidance or direction based on these numbers with respect to hiring that 180 people?
Well, I don't know if 180 is correct, first answer. Not based on these numbers, but we asked the commissioners, we distributed the openings, the budgeted openings, asked the commissioners to work with HR generalist about the priority. HR is working on priority A1 plus. And so their plate is full just with that first wave. And then we will roll down from there. And of course, as revenues go, we'll determine how far down you roll down that list.
How soon will there be a connect between the revenue discussion and how far we go down that list? I mean, it seems like with what we already have in front of us that we would be looking at putting the brakes on the majority of that list, even now.
Well, the reality is it takes a while to hire someone, so there's a break already on in just the processing of hiring people. So that in itself incorporates some time.
Okay. That's a different answer than when the council was trying to get 5 people hired. There was a big crisis on hiring 5 people, but now you're saying since there's a break in the amount of time it takes to hire that we should go on with the 180.
Oh, no, sir, I didn't say we should go on with 180. I said we asked for priorities. They're working on their A1 plus list. And so we will look and see what our pressures are as we decide to work that list down, the priorities per commissioner.
Okay. It just seems with these numbers, we would already be looking at putting a halt on most of that list at this point.
Well, and that's why I use the word strategic hiring. And there are some positions that are felt that are critical and need to be filled. And that dynamic of deciding which one those are is where you get a room full of people and you don't have a consensus of who's first, who's second, who's third.
I guess for next month's meeting, could you bring an update on that list and what the critical hires are and what that number would be?
I can give you an update on our hiring of open positions. Is that your request?
But I'd like you to go a little deeper than that and look at the critical hires, what's been determined as critical hires, and what that number is. I realize, depending on who you ask, you're going to get a different number on what's critical and what's not, but the administration's position.
Councilor Mars, are you looking at that in relation to how much money we're saving, or are you looking at that in relation to the hiring process?
The hiring process. So
'Cause that would belong in InterGov, because that process actually is an item in InterGov that may be better suited, and that committee here meets next week.
well, I'm thinking based on revenue, so it really needs to come here so we can hear the revenue numbers on what it's going to cost to hire those people. As opposed
I just want to clarify for Mr. O'Meara what he needs to be prepared to talk about. If we're going to get into the details of the financial, then it would belong here, but if not, it would belong in InterGov, if we're going to talk about the actual process.
Well, I didn't ask about the process. I asked him to bring back the number of people and the dollar amount it would take to hire those people. And so that's budget and finance, and it would be here.
Are you clear, Mr. O'Meara, on the request?
Can I restate the request a different way?
Sure.
Councilman Meyer, I think what you're trying to do is to compare what a new, updated, projected total personnel costs for 2010 at the next budget meeting. Isn't that the critical nature rather than a position by position? You're trying to look at, we have 190 million budgeted for personnel in the 2010 budget. What is our updated projection of that next month? Is that financially what you're trying to get to?
Right, and that's why I asked for the critical, the ones that that the administration believes are critical to hire, because those are the ones we probably should go ahead and hire. So that number is essentially what the update would be, I would think.
Well, I can
And
give
if
you-
they're not critical, then,
Let me give you the projection and the assumptions that go into that projection for next month.
okay. Thank you.
Anyone else has any questions for Mr. O'Meara on the revenue report? Anything? I did have one comment, Mr. O'Meara, is can we get an update on the expenditure side of the house next meeting in terms of what we're doing to save other expenditures besides the payroll, and where we're tracking on those? In other words, are we saving on building maintenance costs in terms of what have been budgeted? Are you all tracking that monthly? I don't know if our software allows us to do that yet, but are you projecting it?
We can try to give you the monthly financial statements by category. If you want analysis within the category, I don't know that I can have that ready for you next month.
Just more broad, when we're tracking on expenditures.
By large
Right, by
brush.
large.
Okay.
Because all we're doing today is talking about revenues, and, you know, if revenues are down or up, expenditures still matter in that whole equation big time.
They
So,
do. We have competing demands for closing the books as well as closing current month, and so we will come back with some expenditure.
you know, I'll give you, for
information.
instance, council members felt last year, I know we budgeted $273 million, but we came in at a year-end expenditure number of 167 and change. And so council members were curious of how come, you know, where do we save that $6 million? So I think an update as we go along will kind of help us where we're saving money.
Right, and I think that one page, legal size, very busy, but its revenues and expenses was tracking actuals to budget and would help clarify that question.
Very good. Thank you. Item number 2 on our agenda is a presentation on the Urban Services Fund. And Mr. O'Meara, I assume Commissioner Taylor will be giving this presentation. So would you like to go ahead and give us the presentation on the landfill since you're already up here? Are you going to do that one as
Okay.
well? Since you're here, that may make more sense if that's okay with the committee. If we can go ahead and hear the information on the landfill user fee, and then we'll get into the Urban Services Fund, just to save a little transition time here.
All right. This one should be a lot shorter. It's 4 slides. The landfill, major revenue source is the user fee, and it's found in Chapter 16-16.1 of the ordinance book. And that is monthly charges for individual containers or the Herbie container. And then there's a sliding scale for the dumpsters, which, depending on the size, 4, 6, 8, has a different rate to it. They're invoiced, the Herbie containers, which are the residential, are invoiced and collected on the water bill. The dumpsters are invoiced and collected through the Division of Revenue. The fund is also charged with financing the closure of the landfill and a refuge disposal. The FY08 revenues were $8.55 million, with operating expenses of $7.25. The operating income for FY08 was $1.3, and the total change in assets was $1.6 million. The fund balance at 08 was $25.5 million. That was comprised of $21.7 million in capital assets and an unrestricted fund balance of $3.7 million. There is also a reserve of $17.5 million for landfill closure, and that is related to the Haley and Old Frankfurt Pike landfills. And I believe, is there a third one at Raven Run? Okay, and there's some operating for Raven Run. There are water quality issues that are being addressed at those landfills, and capital expenses required to manage and mitigate that. In addition, there is a new Government Accounting Standards Bulletin 49 Pollution Remediation Obligation Reserve, which the Division of Accounting is going through the process to calculate the requirements, and the FY 2009 books will reflect compliance with GASB 49. What impact that will have on the current 17.5 million reserve is the open question for us closing this year's books. The 2010 budget has $7.9 million in service fees, $180,000 investment income. We have $1 million in other income, which is the 10-year contract renewal payment, for a total revenue of 2010 anticipated of 9.1, operating of 6.3, and a transfer of that to the general fund of $1 million, for total operating expenses of 7.3, and there's 1.7 million budgeted for that capital expenditures for managing the two landfills, for a total expenditures budgeted in 2010 of 9.135 million against total revenues budgeted of 9.142.
Councilmember Lane, do you want to start off with questions?
Yeah, Bill, just a couple of questions. The operating expense, could you sort of give us an overview what that relates to? Operating expense, 7.25 million.
Tipping charge, is that the term? I really would rather defer to operational to explain that.
Okay.
It's
that's
not my
all right.
expertise.
No, I don't have a problem with that. Let me just ask one other question on the fund balance.
Yes, sir.
You're showing 25.545 million. I take it that's cash?
No, sir. It's made up of 21.765 million of capital and 3.78 million of cash.
Okay.
But in addition, there is 17.5 reserved for landfill closure. We don't know whether that is sufficient or insufficient to meet GASB 49 requirements.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll ask the operating question later. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other committee members have a question in regards to the landfill user fee? Bill, I did have one question. When will we know about whether or not the 17.5? What's our plan to figure out whether or not that's enough to close the landfills permanently?
We're trying to have financials for 2008 completed 20-something of September to be handed over to our auditors to begin their review. So I think the plan is to have all those calculations, regardless whether it's this fund or other funds, completed by then.
And I see the segue is being made to Commissioner Taylor here, so that I know she has some good comments on the landfill user fund, but I guess for the purpose of this committee, and a lot of people that have asked, do we still need a $4.50 landfill user fee? And if so, if we still need that $4.50 a month, what are we going to use it for going forward? Because we see these numbers, we see what we have in reserve, and I think you may have some comments on that, on what we're currently using that $4.50 for and what we will need going forward.
I don't have studied comments on that. Our focus has been on the Urban Services Fund first, and it's taken some time to dive into that. We've just begun to look at the landfill user fee and have some idea. I mean, I can explain where the operating goes right now and talk a little bit about some opportunities we have, but we haven't really dug into the details of that one yet. I guess it'll be the next one on the radar screen, though, certainly.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions on this before we move into the Urban Services Fund? Councilmember Beard.
Commissioner Taylor, what has to happen, do you, just Cliff Notes version, on Old Frankfort Pike? Because there have been stages of closure out there for some time, and we at one time were entertaining the idea of leasing that land to someone with the assumption that it was closed now.
It isn't closed. I guess when I first came into this role a little over a year and a half ago, I thought it was closed as well, but it is not closed because the water system, the leachate collection system in that landfill is not in compliance at this point. We're working on that right now. We have water problems at both landfills. The year prior to my starting this job, The landfill at Haley Pike had received 84 notices of violation for water quality violations. So a lot of what we're focusing on, first on Old Frankfurt, is to get that leachate system in good shape. We have a couple of capital projects planned. I have a list of those in here for that, to get that in compliance and get that closed. We have to be able to assure the state when we close it that the water is in good condition and that we're going to monitor that we have to monitor for 30 years. So we don't want to close until we get it in compliance. So
Sure.
that's the last step on that one. The Haley Pike, of course, right now we still have an active construction and demolition debris landfill going out there. We certainly have other operations, compost and horse muck and some other groups that we actually either lease or contract to run those operations. So it's still active. We do have very aggressive plans that's being managed by Susan Bush to get the water in compliance. 2 wet cells have been added and planted in the last year, and a new pump that you all approved just before break is going in to help take water from the compost and pump it into a treatment area so that we can get it in compliance.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else on the landfill user fee? Well, we appreciate you. I know you've had a lot of work on the Urban Services Fund here lately, but when we get to that landfill user fee, I'm sure you'll have some good information on that as well. So speaking of Urban Services Fund, you want to go ahead and talk about those 3 different accounts?
Well, learning from the presentation we did the other day, the majority of these handouts are so small that we didn't put them on a slide because it would be an eye strain. But the first page of the handout really just gives you, once again, the same information we covered the other day, which is the big picture of how much money is in the Urban Services Fund projected for the fiscal year that just ended. And then that splits into 3 funds, if you might recall from the other day. The lion's share of it is in waste management, the $24,968,000 and change, and then street cleaning and street lights each gets a portion of that. So that pretty much gives you just a visual of where the fund goes and how those are managed. Now, what we have focused on in the last couple weeks in preparing for this discussion is on the waste portion of that. If you turn to the second page of the handout, that is historical information, really, that was initiated by Councilmember Lane's request to kind of give you a 10-year snapshot of what our spending has been and what our revenue has been in the waste management portion of the Urban Services Fund. You can see also on the 2010 projected budget or proposed budget, that has we've already included that 10% waste tax cut in that number. So that doesn't match what was budgeted. It matches what we're proposing for the next year. It's a lot of data to absorb, so I don't want to run over you there. I find it easier with visuals. So the third page of the handout is a visual representation of all that data on the previous page. It shows you, breaks out for you over 10 years, how much have we spent on personnel, operating capital, and other program expenditures. Other program expenditures, each one of these items certainly has a lot more detail behind it. Other program expenditures includes a range of areas: Lex Call, insurance, debt service, law support, finance administration, CIO office, and it also includes our office, the environmental quality, the commissioner's office, and the Division of Environmental Policy, which is Susan Bush's group. So that all had been attached into that other program expenditures category. So we have some opportunities there. And you can see that based on the visual that capital, we're certainly making up ground in 2009 and 10, and that we also in 2009 saw other program expenditures expand, a little more than historical. Fourth page talks about the funded positions. These are the numbers that are in the budget office. What the budget shows, you can see over about a 5-year span, fairly consistent staffing that did increase in 2008, and that's with the addition of the offices of environmental quality. We still operate at a pretty high vacancy rate, and frankly, the number changes almost daily. But that number, the proposed budget includes waste, it includes environmental quality and policy, and temp positions that are LFUCG payroll temp positions. So there's several of those in there. Right now we have, across the 3 groups, 210 filled positions. And then the final page, and the one that probably takes a little bit more discussion, is where are we going from here? It gives you a little bit of history, a couple of years leading into 2009, and then it's a projection out to 2015 and some data and some assumptions on why we think that the mayor's proposed tax cut is viable. Anything that we do into 5 years into the future, as Bill delicately puts it, is really prognostication. My background and the background I came from was continually challenged year after year to come up with better, smarter ways to do things, to deliver better customer products at a lower cost. That's what I did most of my career. So for me, this is pretty normal business as usual. And what we want to do is provide improved customer service at a better value. And what we made a number of assumptions in putting this forecast together that helps explain the rationale. And those are noted below. If, as proposed, we included a 10% and another 10% cut in the waste portion of the property tax, those would be the numbers that you would use, and those have been calculated in from 2010 on out. We did estimate, and this is the part that you have to have data to base this on, but it's an estimate, is that our recycling revenue will increase significantly over the next 5 years. The immediate reason that could happen is that we are definitely increasing our capacity to run recycling materials through the existing MRF. The future MRF is a different topic of discussion, but at our existing MRF, we were given authority to spend $3.8 million, and we are in the process, the equipment's been ordered, but we will be updating that line, and we will triple the capacity throughput of the existing center. And we'll add significant storage on site, which gives us room to add a lot more material and create a lot more revenue. This year, even in a down year, it was a fairly productive revenue year, and we're already seeing some of those markets rebound. And this is the draft waste study that we just got back a few weeks ago that indicates we have a number of materials that are marketable that we currently do not market. So I think we have a decent database to help us move forward in assuming that our recycling revenue will increase whether we add the new MRF or not. We also assumed in this model a 3-year lag in rebound and property assessments. The budget office actually put a forecast out, a baseline forecast, and they showed a pretty slow growth pattern over the next 3 years. For fiscal year 2010, they estimated a 1.6% growth, 2011, 2.8, 2012, 3.2, 2013, 5.1, and then it rebounds back to more historical levels in 2014, which is 7.5%. So we think we're being reasonably conservative, although we are certainly predicting that we will rebound. So that assumption is built in there as well. The debt service, this was something that we discussed last week and we didn't include at that time. What we did is in the 2011, you can see under bond revenue, we popped in $20 million on a bond revenue with the expectation that building a new MRF on Old Frankfort Pike is a good business investment. I think that what we need to do, I'm very supportive of the idea. Gut feel, I think it's a great investment. But what I need to be able to do is not use gut feel. I need to be able to give you data to indicate that if the city invests $25 million in a new facility, you're going to get a return on your investment that is at least revenue neutral. We want to provide great service, but we want to do that smartly. So what we're trying to do is get the data together to support that. But we did include that as a line item in 2011 so that you could see the impact of that debt and that debt service on the numbers. Let's see, indirect costs. Debt service figures begin in fiscal year 2013, so you can see that as well. Indirect cost, as I mentioned, I think we have opportunities in indirect cost. There are a number of items. Each one of those line items needs to be analyzed for what it costs, what we get for that investment, and can we conserve. For one example is our office and the Division of Environmental Policy are currently funded fully out of the Urban Services Fund. And those of you that participated in the water quality management fee discussion know that as we begin to collect those fees, the plan is to move a portion of that 50% over to the water side of the house. So there's opportunities in some areas to put charges in places where they appropriately belong long term. And I think that we still have a lot of in-depth work to do to make recommendations about that. But I do think there is opportunity there. So the indirect costs, what we are proposing is that we hold them to historical levels with a 3.5% increase over time. Same that we're doing for operating. We're going to try to hold our operating to historical levels with a small increase over time to offset inflation. And that was this 3.5% increase. Okay, we also estimated a $1.4 million savings beginning in fiscal year 11 because of the new recycling equipment that we're putting in the existing MRF on Thompson Road. That we expect to save significantly in labor. We will reduce by almost a third the number of people it takes to run that center. And what it takes us now to run in 10 hours, we'll be able to run in 4. So we predict savings there regarding labor costs, certainly injuries, and other savings that we'll see by being able to single stream is we spend nearly $60,000 a year as a city on glass inserts in the Rosies. We won't need those anymore. So some of those savings are outlined in a separate report, but that's where that number came from. We also estimate, as you've heard, one of our complaints is that we're going to have to change some of these trucks. They're over 10 years old. We're having high maintenance costs, and in order to move to a single stream system, we're going to, in the next 2 years, do heavy vehicle replacement. So you'll see the impact of that capital investment in the next couple of years. And then we have a schedule from that point forward to replace vehicles on a predictable pattern. You'll get spikes as large groups of them age, but we'll be able to predict that over the course of the next several years. And I guess one other thing I'll mention that I didn't write down there is we were asked about the fuel costs. We got numbers from Fleet Services showing roughly that we spent $1 million for fuel in this past fiscal year that just ended, as compared to, say, fiscal year 05 where we spent $750,000, but then compared to fiscal year 08 we spent $1.5 million. So last year was somewhere in the middle of those two. For this forecast, we included fuel costs, and they're embedded in an overall assumed rise in operating expenses that we would attempt certainly to offset with efficiency savings that we expect with the new GPS, GIS-based routing system that we're going to bring forward. That's the same assumption that we make across government. Police and public works and any group that drives a lot of vehicles are assuming the same level. So we do have that built in. But as you can see, based on the assumptions you make, that model is going to shift. And what we show out to 2015 is by that point in time, we'll have essentially a system that takes in what it spends. And that was the goal we were really shooting for in making this proposal. So that's a quick overview. Lots of data in there. We are still researching the details. For example, I mentioned other program expenditures. I know what they are. I know where the money goes. What I haven't had time to do yet is dig into the details of those 20 items to make sure that that's appropriate. And that's going to take, as I mentioned last week, a few more months. We're working through that now. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Council members, okay. Councilor Blues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In trying to get my thoughts straight on a reduction in the user fee, and we'd be saving the taxpayer, I think, first year $24.
That was the estimate for a homeowner who owns a $150,000 home.
Right. And then twice that the second year and so forth. And I'd like to have a better notion of what we might otherwise invest these surpluses fund balance in that might be at least a beneficial alternative use of that money. And just one example, the new MRF.
Mm-hmm. That's certainly an option.
Now that, yeah, and you're predicating what, a $20 million bond in 2011,
Right.
as opposed to, let's say, using the funds that we now have available instead of paying cash in effect and saving all of that service and not risking changing our rating and so on. And I'm also wondering whether any of the I'm not sure whether we can use any of these funds for, let's say, street cleaning, which is an urgent need throughout the city. I know we have a study of that but we're not going to be, even under the best scenario, we're not going to be able to increase street cleaning for several years. So maybe I'm putting this awkwardly, but that's my dilemma here. Whether for the rollback for individual property owners, whether that's adequate compensation for the entire community for what we might otherwise do with this money on on environmentally important projects.
I think that's a choice, and based on the assumptions in the model that we brought forward to you today, it demonstrates that the cuts are possible and the cuts can be managed. I think that the choices that you've suggested are certainly other options. We are suggesting in this model that the MRF be done on a bond basis. I was always brought up in my corporate background that when you have the cash, you spend the cash, you don't borrow. However, in this case, with this particular project, we really do need to do a good job as a community to make a decision about how much we want to invest and what the return on investment is going to be. And a good project should stand on its own merit. And I'm convinced enough that this project, based especially on the data that you haven't had a chance to see the details of, is a project that will stand on its own merit. So I think it's a choice. And this is what we're bringing forward as a proposal and the assumptions that we made. But as a community, it's a choice. How do we want to use those funds and what's the best investment?
Well, one of the things that concerns me, too, is that we know we have the money for the new recycling center. We know that the new recycling center is an absolutely vital need and that the present location is not viable over time. We're on shaky ground there in many ways. And presumably we would next year go forward with that bond issue, but maybe we wouldn't. Maybe there would be some contingency that would prevent us from doing that and further slow, delay the project. And that, it seems to me, is a concern that we're all going to have to weigh in and consider in thinking about this decision. So
Okay.
I appreciate this information. It's very helpful to me, but it doesn't solve my, the problem that I just articulated.
Councilmember Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Commissioner, we do have a long, lengthy, sizable list of capital projects on our horizon over the next several years. There's no reason at all why we couldn't take half of the money and bond half of the money. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing type of thing, does it?
I don't think so. I'll
I wouldn't think so.
default to the expert
Oh, I
here. He said,
understand.
no, it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, I was pretty sure it didn't. And that, that may be a solution to a quandary we may have, and we could maybe help the citizens a little bit and still leave our bonding capacity, help that also a little bit. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Gordon. And
Thank
welcome.
you, Mr. Chair.
We're
Thank
glad to
you.
see you.
Sorry I was late.
No problem at all.
Thank you, Commissioner. I had a couple of questions. Of course, we haven't heard unless I missed it, the bonding and debt presentation. I didn't miss it in a half hour, did I? So I'll be interested to see that in relation to this discussion. I'd like to echo some of the skittishness, maybe it wasn't skittishness, Councilmember Blues is never skittish, but some of your concerns. And also Councilmember Beard mentioned, we have a list of capital needs in this government that is overwhelming. If you all who were here remember Commissioner Coe's, those workshops we had, and it was very overwhelming to me that we cannot even afford things like chillers and roofs on buildings and that sort of thing. So putting it in context of our overall needs, I'm going to need to be pretty heavily convinced that we have to bond this. I did have a couple comments on the bar graph page. It looks like we have been, except for 2 years, fiscal year 07 and fiscal year 08, we have been putting a good chunk into capital improvement from waste management. Fiscal year 07 looks like there was maybe none. None. And then fiscal year 08 was very small. But other than those years, we have put a fair amount of money into capital improvements from the look of this graph. I had thought after last week that we hadn't been, and so I'm glad to see this. I wanted to ask, Councilmember Blues brought up the street sweeping study. In the spring, when the water quality management fee presentation was made, the council passed a motion to request a study of our street sweeping because of the close connection between clean streets and clean water going into the sewer system. And I wondered if you can tell me how far along that is, just to kind of add that in here to the discussion. Have we gotten that going? Are we?
The study was commissioned, but I don't know where they are in that because it's being managed out of Public Works. But I don't know. You don't have any data, do you? Okay. No, I'm sorry.
That's
I can
okay.
Ask, we can
If
ask Commissioner Webb.
If
to
it's
update.
being managed in Public Works, maybe we can get an update from him.
The street cleaning, you know this, and street lights, both those chunks of the pie on that first page are, those areas are managed under Public Works and Development.
Well, I appreciate this information. I only had one more question, and that was on your page where you list the funded positions in the Division of Environmental Quality. How many temps are we using in waste management specifically? Of these positions listed?
I got a complete listing of temp positions, but what it didn't sort for me was which ones were temp with LSBCG and which ones were temp through a labor contract. I believe it's approximately 30, but I'm not positive that that's accurate. Do you?
In waste management?
60 temps overall, but what I can't tell you is the split between. All are from temp service. Okay.
So there's 60 overall. So if I look at the adopted budget for fiscal year 10, where it says under waste management, 248, 202 of which are filled, are those all, are 60 of those temps? Can you go to the microphone, please? Thank you.
The handout only references people on our payroll, not through a temp contract with a private organization.
So these don't include any temps?
Some of our positions are temporary classification that are on our payroll.
But they're not a temp agency, they're not contracted
Correct.
out?
Exactly.
Okay,
That's the confusion. We're trying to split
Okay.
between those two characteristics.
so these 202 filled positions in waste management in fiscal year 10 are all LFUCG employees?
Yes.
Yes, but some are temps. They're
Or
They're temporary.
unclassified. I'm sorry, I'm
Yes,
using the
I
wrong word.
understand.
There's
They're not-
unclassified, which are folks that work for us. For
Right.
example, we have a part-time project manager right now who's managing the pump installation at Haley Pike.
Okay.
We also have a person who is a temp who is taking the place of our landfill inspector who's retiring September 1st, and she's
Okay.
filling in the gap. But what I don't know is how many.
Okay, that's okay. But they're not contracted out
No.
as temporary,
We do
as
have other
temps from a
folks who are
contract.
contracted out, and we use those a lot of in waste collection, and you said there's about 60 of those. Okay, that's what I thought. We use about 30 to 32 people a day at the recycling center, and all of those folks are temporary agency under contract, and we use about 25 to 30 a day in waste collection or recycling collection.
Okay. Well, I'll look forward to the bonding presentation. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. I just have one question. Can you take this model, can this model be used to run an analysis on what it would come out to be for a flat fee for solid waste collection?
Well, that would require being able to make direct relationships between expenditures and the particular line items that we have on that model. A model could be developed, but it's also an analysis unto itself. And you know, as part of the recommendations from back in 2006, that was one option that was suggested. We have a rough idea of what it costs to pick up materials at households service-wise. We did a comparison between Lexington, Madison, Wisconsin, Greenboro, North Carolina, and tried to do an apples to apples and have a rough idea. But it would need some refining before it would be a model that we would put out, I think, to make predictions from.
How much work would that take with what you have done to complete that model and run the
To
analysis?
go to a fee-based system, pretty extensive work. I suspect we would have to look at Bill a little bit, but I suspect we'd have to bring in someone to help us with that. That would be pretty in-depth analysis. We don't have services right now accounted for by service. So it's a fundamental shift to go from where we are today to that point. And then you'd have to do a lot of estimating about who would need what services and which services would they purchase if that was an option. Because we pick up certainly waste and recycle, we have compost, we have mattresses, we have white goods, appliances, those types of services not everybody necessarily would buy into. There are also some impacts in those kinds of services if someone chose not to use that service. From my time at the state, what I saw happen in many communities is there was a huge increase in illegal dumping. So you have to decide what are you going to require as service versus what's a choice. And so there are a lot of policy calls we'd have to make to really give you a good number. But we have discussed what would it take to get us from where we are today to a per service rate. And I think that's going to be a pretty involved look. It takes some time and some study with some expertise in order to do that.
Okay. Well, someone said make a motion to do that, so I guess I'll do that. I guess I just move for our committee to go ahead and run that analysis and put together whatever you need to do that. So moved.
We have a motion and a second to go ahead and ask the administration to conduct a waste management analysis in terms of fee structure. Is that sufficient, Councilmember Myers?
That's it.
And I assume we're talking a year or longer to get that done, or less?
Well,
Do you have
I'm
any
always
idea?
interested in less.
Thank you. I
That's
am too.
probably a generous time frame, but again, it's a matter of how many resources can we bring to bear on that question.
Well, if
So-
you could report out back to us in terms of a game plan, a time frame, after you've had a chance to
Okay, that
talk
would
about
help.
with your
Then
folks.
I can give you a more educated answer right
Okay.
now.
We have a motion on the table. Any discussion? Councilor Lane.
Yeah, I would like for us, if we need to bring an outside consultant, use some of our surplus funding to pay for that, and if I would help you any.
I think it would help tremendously, yes.
That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments from anyone else? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Say nay. Okay, that passes. Any other questions for Commissioner Taylor?
Is it possible to maybe come back in our October meeting with kind of an update on where you guys would be heading with that?
Oh, sure,
October
yeah.
meeting?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
that's no problem.
Anyone else, any other questions? I do have a couple myself, Commissioner. One, on your analysis and your projection forward 5 years, I don't see anything in there about personnel and making up the vacancy deficit. Is there a plan to make up those vacancies in the budget? I don't see the personnel really jumping. Also to fill the new MRF. I assume we'll need new personnel if we expand the operation out there. Is there any?
Well, and it's a balance. Steve, of course, has been pretty aggressive about, as we move to the single stream system with the current MRF, we have an opportunity there to drop the number of people that it takes to service certain routes. So we're hoping to reduce the total number of public service workers, but increase the number of more skilled workers. So that essentially will drop some, add some. That could be a wash.
It actually assumes full complement in the model.
Can you come to the microphone? And
Sorry, thank you.
I guess my concern
Thankfully,
is,
Brad has the
just so
detail.
you all can address it, my concern is you have 58 vacancies. Are we going to make up 58 vacancies, or is our plan only to make up half of those, and do we need to make those up?
Yeah, well, this particular model assumes that we're going to fill up to our personnel complement.
So all 58 we plan on hiring in that model?
Any as we're allowed, basically.
Well,
Yes.
yes.
58 then, yeah.
So, yeah, whatever the proposed budget is, 268 right now is the number of
Right,
authorized positions.
yeah.
So how soon are we going to fill those? This year? We're going to do it over a couple years, 3
Well,
years?
We, like everyone else, had a priority list of hires, and I turned the list in for our department last week to HR. We have 17 positions on the most critical list right now, and we have and that's for the department, not just waste. And we have several other, 7 or 8, that are already in process. This weekend, if you noticed in the Herald, there was an ad for drivers. We had public service workers and equipment operator senior. So that was our number one most critical need in the department. And that one, of course, we're trying to fill. But hopefully, over the course of the next year, our most critical positions would be filled. And as Steve evaluates as we go forward, it's been his plan to try to increase the skill level but reduce the overall number. So we're moving forward with a plan to try to maintain what we've been budgeted for, not to ask for additional, and to reduce where possible. We're certainly going to reduce the total number of people at the existing MRF because we don't need as many people to run the equipment. It's more automated than in the old days. And the trucks, like I mentioned before, won't need as much labor because you won't have to get out of the truck and dump the glass. Different sorts of things will be automated. So we're hoping to reduce the overall need. And then as we have any volume increase, we'll put people back in those spots. So it ought to come out even.
Well, my main concern too is, with over a 20% vacancy rate, the current manpower and the workload they're handling right now, if you're not filling those positions, I mean, someone's having to do some of those jobs in a lot of cases. So, it's hurting them too and their morale. So the quicker, the sooner, the better if we have already budgeted that in your model.
Well, we did budget it, and it was the number one rated request for our entire department. We have over 75 vacancies in our department total, so not quite half of the total city vacancies are there.
Okay.
But we put our number one vacancy is in waste, and that was to get people out on trucks.
When you're looking at your analysis going forward as well, you estimate about $6,000 a year in dumpster fees coming in as a revenue stream. Have we calculated how much it really costs us to pick those dumpsters up? Because I'm sure it costs us a lot more than the $6,000 we're getting, and while we're still doing it, if we're going to pay, say $500,000 to pick those up, it just doesn't seem the math works to why we would stay in that business to keep picking them up and only make $6,000.
Well, right now, those fees are set by ordinance, but we're starting to take a look at what does it really cost us to do that, and we can have a recommendation, I think, to propose to council to make a change. It does definitely cost us a lot more to pick up the material than what we charge. I guess I don't have the rationale from the background, maybe Steve can chime in, but I think probably part of the rationale for keeping that low cost is to encourage people to use them. As opposed to, say, dumping it on the curb or in some other location that we have to go after and clean up. But frankly, it is going to cost us quite a bit more to haul that dumpster than we charge.
And I assume those are the commercial dumpsters at location, not the Lona boxes. These are the commercial ones, right?
Oh, you're talking about yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you meant the other.
No, I just want to make sure we're not confusing the two. The Lona box that we charge $30-something for.
Yeah, those are, all of the dumpsters and all of the programs, we do not charge what it actually costs us to pick it up. So I'm sorry about that, but really that applies to both groups.
Okay. And last but not least, the comment on the surplus, the current surplus of $24 million. Obviously, anytime you have a surplus, you have two things at work. Either you had mismanagement in terms of not spending all your revenue, or you had too much revenue that you collected in form of a tax. And my concern is not necessarily with the $24 million. I hope you have a good plan on spending it. I'd like to be a part of that discussion on how we spend that, of course. But my main concern is, are we going to keep adding to that surplus? And going forward, that's what I hope to see out of the reduced taxes. We're not going to add to a surplus anymore. We're going to spend what we collect and manage the system efficiently and properly based on the money we're collecting from residents. And I assume your model, if something were to happen next year, that we did not reduce it again, that we determined that based on after a year in the belt. How have you prepared that situation in your modeling here, the 5-year plan forward? If we did not reduce it 2 years in a row, what would happen? If we just did it 1 year?
No, but that could be done easily. We were focused on what happens if we do 2 in a row, and that's kind of the way the model shows. If that didn't happen and you chose to make one cut, for example, or no cuts, fundamentally, it's our goal to provide the best service at the lowest cost that we can possibly do. So we're moving forward with the same assumptions and projects to deliver the best service at the lowest cost. If the cuts do not happen, I think that you have flexibility or options to make decisions about other ideas. For example, Councilmember Blues mentioned perhaps you would not want to bond that MRF, you would want to use a surplus in that project or other projects that seem appropriate. But we can predict that however you want. It's a model that we worked with budget's original numbers and then Brad developed for us that we can use to predict surpluses. Our goal, as you can see from the 2015, was to come out even. We're trying to take in what we need to provide the service that we need to provide.
So then what's happened the last 2 years? I mean, it's jumped $13 million of surplus. Have we had a freeze on hiring, a freeze on capital expenditures? I mean, I'm just curious of what's happened the last 2 fiscal years to get that up double the amount it was in '06.
Well, and I looked at it back several years previously. I think historically, if you went back, I want to say 2003, a little over half of the surplus was in waste. And then recently, over 3/4 of the surplus is in waste. And one explanation would be not investing in capital. And even though we did do a little bit in 2008, we essentially had 2 years there where several $1 million accumulated because we bought no new trucks.
And whose decision was that?
Well, at the time, it was before I actually got here, we went through a period where we didn't have a director, we had acting director, but we also had some issues around 2006 and 2007 with fuel emissions changes in engines. And I think that the decision was made by the director from 2 years ago to hold up and wait to see what happened with those emissions standards so that we could buy the most current trucks. So I think Kevin's nodding because he was here and I wasn't, so I rely on there. But my understanding was at that time the decision was made to wait because they were afraid if they purchased trucks, then we'd have to go back and retrofit later and it would cost more money. So we kind of had a 2-year span there where we didn't invest in equipment and our vacancy rate went very high. And so I think that's probably contributed to the surplus in both areas, and I'm sure other circumstances that I could probably offer.
I don't think you read out the surpluses in the street light or street cleaning fee. I don't think you read that out on the mic.
No, I didn't. I could
Can you do that for us and we'll wrap it up?
Yeah. The street light surplus currently is $2,896,913. And in street cleaning, it's $2,160,470.
Very good.
And of course, that's compared to almost $25 million for waste.
Anybody else have any other questions before we move on? Councilman Lane.
Yeah, with regard to the employment standards, what type of shifts do our collectors work now? They're on like 4 10-hour shifts, or how does that set up?
Would you like to? Okay. Yeah, four 10-hour shifts.
Okay. Do we still pay undertime compensation?
No. Do you want to explain the pay piece before I mess up? Let me make sure that we give you current. Okay. There's been a lot of work done in the last year to improve that situation.
Last year, an internal audit was done to follow up on, I think, the 2006 audit, and we can come back and share that with you, but they did note in an internal audit that while we still have undertime in our system, our incentive system with waste management pickup will always allow for some level of undertime, because when they get their job finished, they go home. We don't want them hanging around. So they're always there for 8 hours at least, and oftentimes more than 8 hours. But when they get done, they will still be able to actually go home. But the level of undertime has decreased dramatically.
Okay, because that was one of the major problems we had 5 years ago, where we had a lot of undertime, a lot of overtime. And do you actually keep a sort of a running track, costs for overtime and undertime? Do you have a handle on, so you're within a reasonable range of expenditure there?
Yeah, we can always look at now that we have the automated timekeeping systems. Those numbers are easily accessible. We can always pull those up fairly easily.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to our next agenda item. We have about 30 minutes left and two items. Hopefully, I'm not sure if we can get through both items. They're both pretty lengthy discussions. Is there any feeling as to which one we want to try first today? We have the bond update and the business occupational license discussion. Is there any sentiment as to which one you want to tackle first? All right, we'll go ahead and proceed with the bond since it's on the screen. How's that? Mr. O'Mara, once again, welcome.
Hi. I have an accountant's dream here. It's tremendously small and very busy with lots of information. It's the exercise we went to in order to give you a 2-slide update. There's a lot of history here, but let me give you the, I made this summary just before I came. And I was answering the question, hopefully I'm answering the correct question. I'm looking at general fund debt because it kind of explodes when you try to look at all fund debt. So I concentrated on general fund, and that's what I'm presenting here today. And just to give you a how to read the spreadsheet, the first page is listed by year from current June 30 of 09 going all the way out to 2016. And it lists all of the bond issues that we are currently obligated, and it shows when they roll off, as well as the lower portion is showing you anticipated or predicted bond amounts. The second page turns the exact same information into debt service payments. So first page is total bond debt outstanding. Second page is debt service to support those bonds. But to recap, our current obligations are at $229,143,000, and our annual debt service is $19.98 million. This year, we have planned a GO capital expenditure issue in the fall of 09 of about $50 million. Hopefully it will be less than that. We have a police and fire pension issue of $35 million. And then we have Eastern State Hospital bond anticipation notes, which are not supposed to cost us anything, but we're the financing conduit for that construction phase of Eastern State Hospital. We did the first one this June with another one next June, and then the third year would be the final bonding with the anticipated opening of the facility. In order to predict out the bonding, had to come up with some assumptions. And so the assumptions that we've used is that there would be a $35 million issue in 2011, a $20 million in 2012, and then $15 million in each of the years, 13, 14, 15, and 16. And then in addition to that, the police and fire pension, there would be an additional $31 million in 11, $34 million in 12, $37 million in 13, and $40 million in 2014. And if you layer in those assumptions, given the debt obligations that we have as of today, it results in a 2016 balance of $382 million with a debt service of $52.5 million per year. That's 15.12% of revenue. That includes, over the course of this past year as well as through 2016, $247 million going toward the police and fire pension. And by 2016, if you exclude the police and fire pension debt, our bonding is at 10.25% of revenue, but including all obligated debt, it would be 15.12%. And there's lots of detail in here that gets us from point A to point Z.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I know we have some questions. Councilmember Lane.
Just a quick question on the police and firefighter pension fund bond. We're getting an offset in that we've reduced our actual payment into that fund. So is there an offset on that that helps us a little bit on our numbers there?
Let me make sure I use the right words. We avoided an increase rather than getting an offset. But your point is well taken. If we were not making this debt service for these bonds, then our actual salary expense in operating would be going way up and probably equivalent to or greater than the bond payment.
That's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else have any questions? I have one myself. We're talking about general fund bond debt as opposed to, we also have urban services fund debt. When the rating agencies look at our bonds and our ability to go to market, are they looking at both funds together or government as a whole versus in particular?
Well, as you know, I don't have a whole lot of experience here, but I think they look at everything with the questions that they ask.
So Councilmember Gordon brought up earlier about going to market with a $20 million bond for solid waste. That would be an urban services bond. Or if we do on the stormwater coming up, they're going to be all looked at under LFUCG umbrella.
Well, let me make sure I answer this correctly. They look at everything about our government, but when it's a revenue-based bond, such as stormwater, sewer, or urban service, they're going to look at that fund specifically, then look at the overall health of Dearborn County government. Because if that specific fund fails, it's going to look to the general fund to make it whole. But it has a track record of revenue generation and rates that are already in, and they know what kind of collection rate you have. And they have the history of the predictability of that dedicated revenue when they're looking at a revenue bond issue. The GO, they're looking at the general fund and what is available and predictable within the general fund. Does that help clarify?
It does, but I guess you kind of led me to my next point is we don't have any revenue bonds right now.
I think we do.
Okay.
I think there are some sewer.
Right, besides the sewer.
Right.
My question was...
There wouldn't be in GO.
Right. I know in the GO.
The general obligation.
But on like if the solid waste MRF, would that be a revenue bond?
I would think it would be, yes, because it's dedicated property taxes.
On your numbers, projecting the debt out 5 years, and I want to say I appreciate you working on this. I know you got this assignment at about 7 o'clock last Tuesday and getting this to us, but I think this gives us a good snapshot, and it was critically needed to kind of allow us to, our thought processes going forward on the capital. Your projection out over the next 5 years, that kind of gives us like a benchmark as to how much we can really afford to bond. Is that what you're saying when you projected this out? Or hoping we would stay within?
I'm just projecting.
Smart answer. But, in essence, though, anything above that or below that would either add or hurt us even worse than 15.12% of our revenue.
To answer your question, look at the assumptions that I used. Police and fire pension, annual CIP. EEOC, replacement for this building.
That's what I was getting to. None of that is in here.
That's correct.
So anything else we do is going to blow that 15.12% revenue number out of the water.
And if you will see, it actually peaks in 2015 and then slightly tapers in 2016. And here's where I need to put in my usual disclaimer whenever I'm talking to you. We've used assumptions here, and we're looking out 5 years. What interest rates will be and the structure of the debt and each issue will vary this projection to what actually happens. But this is our best projection at this point in time.
Well, I just want to make sure committee members know this doesn't include those big ticket items, and this is just a $15 million CIP annual project list, and that's not a lot of money. When you start talking about EOCs for $50 million and new government center for close to $50 million, so this gives us a lot of information to chew on. See I have a couple more council members here. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, you highlighted something that concerns me, and I really, I don't remember, Bill, maybe you remember, or maybe Jerry Southers or Mr. Chair, when we had the workshops on capital back with Commissioner Coe, we had a number of capital needs, and what was that? Does anybody remember? I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was humongous. How was it, 200 or 300 million? And so what you said about, I realize that the waste management is a separate fund with separate revenues, but if they look at the big picture for bonding, and we go up to 15.12% of our revenue, which we've, as I recall, not maybe ever been that high. We've always been very conservative and tried to stay around 10% or less, right?
That's my understanding.
So if we look at the whole big picture and we bond in the waste management fund and up that debt service, an outstanding principal, and then we go up to the 15.1% of revenue, and we haven't put in a new government center, we haven't put in an EOC, we haven't put in a lot of the needs that we have, it gives me great concern. And, just, it might actually be too soon to make the decision to lower the waste management fee because of the big picture. And if they're going to look at the big picture, the bond rating entities, and we're projecting going up this high in our debt service and really haven't covered some of the major needs, it gives me great concern. And my thinking now is, and I'm wondering if maybe next year's the year to look at it once the task force that's doing the government center has progressed and once we've got some other pieces in place. I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking. So just, I appreciate all your good work. I know we've asked for a ton of stuff from you, and I thank you so much. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Beard.
Thank you, Chair. Councilmember Gordon, you forgot 4 fire stations, I believe, also. and equipment, attendant equipment, and that was what I was referencing last time I spoke. I'm curious about something, the Tates Creek Library bonds.
Yes, sir. If you will look on the second page, you'll see a income that makes that cost to the government zero.
Okay.
So, but it is underwritten by LFUCG, so I think it's considered one of our obligations. If I'm,
okay.
This is my understanding and proper presentation.
Next question: when you reference the KU building, you're talking about the Phoenix building, I assume.
I said government building. I didn't mean to say KU building. I said that they're. Oh, okay. In here.
Yeah.
Probably. This is in 2000 before I was active in bonding, so.
I'm assuming that's what it was.
Probably,
we
yeah.
didn't build the building for them down the street, so I don't think. Well, we may have in one way or another, but anyway, we didn't bond it. Thank you, Bill.
Sure.
Anyone else have any other questions on this topic? I just have one final comment and caution as well to add to Councilmember Gordon's comments is on your general fund, those are projections as well.
They are.
And I assume you just took a sort of modest growth rate on each year, 3 to 5%.
It's down at the bottom, and
Right.
and we tried to agonize on what is appropriate. And so we're showing, taking all the way through 2011 before we start to see significant, and then a few years before we return to normal growth. If we rebound quicker, it will make the comparisons look better.
But in 7 years, you're saying we're going to grow the government general fund by $80 million. That's a big number to grow our community. Anybody else? Well, thank you, Bill. We appreciate your comments on the bond summary. The last item on our agenda is the business occupational license fee. Councilman Beard had originally asked us to be placed into committee for discussion. I think there's a lot of people, just kind of frame what the concerns are, that are doing business in Fayette County, i.e. realtors, insurance people, umpires, referees that don't necessarily live in Fayette County but may only be doing business 1 day a year or 1 hour a year. I think there's some concern that they need to be paying the business occupational license fee and sort of give an updated of the ordinance that we passed back in budget of '09 as to who should be paying this fee. So, Mr. O'Meara, you want to take over?
All right. I think my slide may be insufficient because I say all business activity in Fayette County. That's the second bullet. The ordinance was passed. It went into effect January 1st or December 31st of this year. Excuse me. And it provided for a minimum annual license fee of $100 on all business activity in Fayette County due January of each year. And it's applied as a non-refundable credit on the following year's net profit return. So for a calendar year, a person who started business who has business in January 1 of 2009, they are to pay $100 January 1 of 2009. April 15th of next year, which is when they file their tax return, that's when they also file a net profit return for their business activity for calendar year 2009. And so the two examples there are showing what a non-refundable credit means. So if after they did their taxes, they had a total net profit occupational tax due of $130, they get to take credit for that $100 minimum license fee that they paid January 1 of 2009 and remit to us the additional payment of $30. If, however, their tax return showed that their total amount due was $90, they have already paid the minimum, which is $100. And so no more taxes are due when they file their April 15th tax return. So, and each January, if they are going to be conducting business in Fayette County, then they would owe the $100. The point of discussion is what we call 1099 or contract activity. And the business license fee is on all business activity. So if you are someone who comes in and is here for a short amount of time or a long amount of time, and you generate a whole lot of revenue or a small amount of revenue, your business activity footprint has been established in Fayette County, and we have a minimum business license fee due of $100. And so I think it's that minimum level that has brought up the discussion. I have statistics of the first year if you want them, but if that's not germane to your conversation today, okay. All right. We had a total number of active accounts of 33,755, and one of the benefits of rolling this out is we cleaned our database. We had a lot of people, we had been sending notices, you haven't filed. Well, they went out of business, so they deep-sixed the notice. We kept that active because we did not know. So anyway, we had 5,800 people come forward and say, I've closed my business, I'm not active. So we cleansed the database down to 27,900. As of last month, 19,458 had paid, and we had collected 1.9 million in the minimum license fee.
Very good. Councilmember Gordon, I believe you have questions to start off.
Thank you. I have a quick question, Bill. When this first went into effect, I know there were a lot of phone calls and questions and beehive activity among businesses, particularly very small businesses and some of the hairdressers and some of the people who, have little businesses. So I just wondered if those have continued or if this has evened out to where you feel like people understand and or will we get this flurry again next time?
Well, I only have one season to experience, and it's not yet over, so I'm not
Right.
sure that I can put historical perspective. In my world, it has blips depending on when someone in a certain business segment becomes aware of it, starts talking to other people in that business segment. And so whether it's at, my mind's gone blank as to home-based businesses or out-of-county entering in. So things had calmed down until this summer, and Bluegrass State Games came in, and part-time referees coming into the county for a single event or for a short amount of time found out about it, and everyone's been sharing their opinions
Okay.
within that
With
segment.
you?
With
Anybody who will
a
listen?
lot of people, yes.
Okay, well now, do we, is there a pretty good system right now to alert people who are opening a new business about this?
When they come in and register, if they're required to have a certificate of occupancy, there is a direct link between not code enforcement, building inspection and us. And we have a packet of information that explains it. We're looking to get them on our rolls at that time. We have an enforcement section who goes through Sunday papers and incorporations and advertisements and street corners and that type of thing. And our approach is education first, enforcement second. Local taxation in Kentucky is unique to Kentucky, and it has free choice by local government, and lots of people decide to do it different ways. So there is a lot of education in people knowing about the local government taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Blues.
Bill, where does the money go? The $100?
The net profit occupational tax line, which is the second item in my revenue, I talk about withholdings and I talk about net profit. It goes to that second net profit line. It's general fund money.
But does it pay for some necessary process, or?
It is general fund money, whether it's, if you want to say, what did the first 1.9 million of budget pay for, whether it's streetlights, whether it's police, fire, the utilities on this building, it is not earmarked.
So it's not for some special function within government and some sort of processing fee? That's not its point.
Well, no, sir, it's not, but let me, before we had a $100 minimum license fee, we had a $25 registration fee for when you come and first time identify yourself in Lexington. And that was an administrative fee for us to process you, put us on the books, and know that you have activity here. We send all the forms to you, that kind of thing. So the $100 minimum replaced that. So we no longer charge the administration, first time administration.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
So, Councilmember Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Explain to me a little bit about the difference between the net active accounts and the accounts paid. That's a 30% difference.
It is, we have a total on our rolls of people who have in the past said that I have activity in Fayette County. That's the 27,900. Are they truly active? We started out at 33,700 and 5,800 said I haven't been active for last year or this year or whatever. So that is our total population of potential accounts. 19.5 is how many have paid us as of last month.
Do we do anything aggressive to get them to pay or to move them into the closed account column? Or how are we going to address that?
Well-
Because it could be just a protest of the $100.
Could be. And so when they file April 15th, they'll owe 125 instead of 100. So there is a penalty for that protest.
If they're not paying it, it doesn't make any difference anyway.
However, we sent second notices. We waited till April 15th, since this was the first year. We sent second notices, or I think we did April 1st. So anyway, people were processing taxes, they got educated. We got a great response for that second notice. We sent out first notices the 1st of December or in November. I don't remember exactly when. And so now our charge is to come up with third notice program at this point.
Okay, do you have any feel, though, about how many of these might be just a protest as opposed to?
No, I don't. I mean, this is our first experience.
Nobody's called you up and said, see, I haven't paid my 100, how do you like it?
Not personally, no,
Really?
sir.
Okay. Well, I just wondered. Thank you.
I got one final question, we'll wrap up the mini bill.
Yes, sir.
Is there not an opportunity to have businesses pay this on their net profits return rather than doing a separate mailing out at the beginning of each year? Have we looked at that? Because that would probably save us some postage dollars and just collect it up on the return.
Well, it's due the year before your return is due. So are you talking about adding it so that this is what you owe for last year, here's what you owe for next year? Then instead of it being due January 1st, it would be due April 15th of each year.
Right, just
is that your-
administratively, just add it to our net profits form and either pay it in arrears or pay it forward, either way. But it'd make it a lot simpler, I think, for you all and for business owners having to cut a $100 check on a separate whole piece of paper if they forget to do it.
We can certainly do that. If you postpone it a year, there's a loss of revenue for waiting to get it. If you postpone it from January 1 to April 15th, it's just a 3.5 month delay, and still in the same fiscal year.
We can talk about that.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything else? Well, I want to thank Bill. Thank you for getting today's materials together for this meeting. It's been a long meeting. I want to thank Mary Pfister as well and Commissioner Taylor for all the work they did in getting here and getting their folks here. And I appreciate all the information. And we stand adjourned.